They say karma never misses. That one day, the pain you felt will circle back to those who caused it. It's a comforting thought, imagining the universe keeping score while you quietly heal. But what if that's not how it works? What if karma doesn't come because you were the karma? What if your awakening, your silence, your clarity, your peace, was the consequence they never expected? See, for the empath, the greatest illusion isn't the betrayal. It's believing that justice comes from outside. It doesn't. It begins the moment you stop absorbing everyone else's storms and finally see the weather inside your own soul. That's the point where vengeance loses its thrill and awareness takes its place. Jung would call this individuation, the sacred shift from victimhood to vision. It's when the unconscious mind opens its eyes and whispers, "You were never powerless. You were just asleep." But let's be honest, awakening doesn't look graceful at first. It looks like heartbreak, like nights staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations you wish had gone differently. It looks like realizing that the same love that made you soft also made you blind. You gave and gave, not because you were weak, but because you believed love could fix what awareness must reveal. And when you finally see the pattern, it's devastating until it becomes divine. Because something strange happens when an empath wakes up. The energy flips. The manipulator loses their script. The narcissist loses their reflection. The entire dynamic collapses, not because you fought back, but because you stopped playing. That's the hidden law Jung hinted at. When one person becomes conscious, the system can no longer operate unconsciously. Awareness is the quiet revolution that makes everything false begin to unravel. And maybe that's why so many people fear the empath's silence. It's not emptiness, it's a mirror. The moment you stop chasing closure, you become the closure. The peace they took for granted becomes the absence they can't stand. That's not karma. That's coherence, the universe reorganizing itself around truth. Because once you step out of illusion, you stop being a character in someone else's chaos and become the author of your own alignment. So this isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about awakening. About the kind of awareness that doesn't destroy your enemies, but dissolves your attachment to them. About the rare souls who feel everything, fall apart, and then rebuild themselves with light so steady that even the dark can't touch it. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too emotional, or too forgiving, stay. Because by the end of this journey, you'll understand the truth Jung left us. The awakened empath doesn't wait for karma. They become it. There's a strange comfort in imagining revenge, that fantasy where justice finally balances the scales. But through the lens of Jungian psychology, revenge isn't really about justice. It's about shadow. When someone hurts an empath, the first reaction often comes from the unconscious mind, the wounded part that still believes healing will come when the other person suffers too. Yet that illusion fades when awareness steps in. In truth, the desire to strike back is the shadow begging to be seen, not obeyed. It's the part of us still seeking validation from the same energy that caused the wound. Carl Jung once said that what you resist persists. The empath who keeps replaying betrayal stories in their head isn't healing. They are reliving the trauma through empathy itself. This is the tangled dance between trauma and empathy, where the pain becomes a signal of something deeper, something archetypal. Taking the empath test won't reveal this layer. Only reflection will. When someone learns how to deal with toxic people, it's not about confrontation. It's about learning emotional boundaries that protect the soul's growth, not the ego's pride. Think about it. The awakened empath doesn't wake up one day craving revenge. They wake up tired of the same loop, tired of feeding the same energy. In the quiet, they begin their empath healing journey, learning that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's energetic hygiene. They stop asking, How do I make them feel what I felt? And start asking, why did I allow myself to carry what isn't mine? That's the shift from reaction to awareness, from shadow to individuation. It's where true healing for empaths begins. There's a moment, subtle but profound, when the empath realizes that revenge would only make them more like the person who caused the wound. Jung would call this identification with the shadow. It's when the healer becomes what they are trying to escape. But individuation requires observation, not imitation. When an empath learns to stand still in awareness instead of reacting, the unconscious mind begins to transform chaos into clarity. The storm doesn't vanish, but the empath stops being dragged by it. And that's the paradox. The more conscious the empath becomes, the less interest they have in winning the emotional war. They don't want to win, they want peace. Their revenge is silence, their power is presence. Because awareness doesn't destroy the enemy, it dissolves the illusion of one. And when that illusion fades, something new appears, something that looks a lot like a mirror. When an empath finally awakens, something magical happens, not loud, but seismic. It's the kind of change that doesn't echo through arguments, only through silence. They stop reacting and start reflecting. Suddenly, every manipulator, every critic, every narcissist begins to flinch under a truth they can't name. Awareness becomes a mirror, not made of glass, but of light, and in that light, illusions melt. That's the secret Jung hinted at in his studies of the unconscious mind. The moment we become aware, the shadow loses its disguise. In the world of sports, think of Simone Biles standing before the world, choosing peace over medals. Cameras flashed, critics shouted, but she didn't fight back. She reflected. She became the mirror. And in doing so, she made millions confront their own projections about strength and worth. That moment wasn't rebellion, it was revelation. The awakened empath doesn't need to scream their truth. Their stillness exposes the world's noise. That's healing for empaths in its purest form, awareness turning pain into presence. Now shift scenes. Picture Barack Obama at a press podium, mid-storm of criticism, choosing not to retaliate but to rise above. Calm voice, measured gaze. He embodied Jung's individuation, the capacity to remain whole amid chaos. His composure was more than discipline, it was energetic mastery. In every insult thrown his way, he let projection return to its source. That psychological karma in motion, not cosmic revenge, but balance restored through consciousness. Awareness, not anger, carried the final word. And it happens in ordinary lives too. A woman ends years of emotional exhaustion when she stops explaining herself to someone committed to misunderstanding her. A man once addicted to fixing broken people finally says, "Not this time." That moment, quiet, almost invisible, is the break in the cycle. The awakened empath doesn't seek revenge. They become the mirror that burns illusions. Their power lies not in retaliation, but reflection. The mirror does the work. Awareness delivers the justice. And once that mirror is lifted, there's no turning back. Every lie, every mask, every false light begins to collapse under its own reflection. The empath doesn't have to act, only witness. Because what comes next isn't destruction, but revelation. And that revelation always begins with pain, the kind of pain that doesn't close the eyes, it opens them. Pain has a strange way of becoming the teacher we never asked for. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And he was right, because pain cracks the armor we build around the truth. When an empath's heart breaks, it's not the end of a story, it's the beginning of seeing. The storm that once looked like punishment now feels like initiation. It's the moment when the unconscious mind, the buried self, whispers, "Look closer." This is where the empath's healing journey truly begins. Not in escaping the wound, but in letting the light pass through it. Imagine someone betrayed by a person they trusted most. At first, they drown in disbelief, that dizzying mix of grief and self-blame. But somewhere between the tears and the silence, something shifts. They start observing instead of reacting. They begin to see patterns, the same story playing out in different faces, over and over. That's when pain transforms from chaos into clarity. What was once unbearable becomes instructive. And the empath realizes, awareness was hidden inside the wound all along. Think of it like a window, cracked, but luminous. Through that fracture, light enters where it never could before. It's not a poetic illusion, it's neurology. Studies in analytical psychology show that deep emotional ruptures often trigger what Jung called numinous experiences, flashes of meaning that rewire the psyche. Pain, when faced with awareness, becomes an instrument of individuation. It's the soul's way of saying, "You've seen enough illusions, now it's time to see yourself." The empath who embraces this process no longer fears their emotions. They begin to use them as a compass. There's a quiet revolution that happens inside the heart when you stop labeling pain as an enemy. The empath who once absorbed everyone's darkness begins to realize their sensitivity isn't a curse, it's radar. It detects what's real. Trauma and empathy are deeply intertwined. One sharpens the other. The inner child who once cried for love now becomes the inner guide pointing toward truth. Healing for empaths isn't about feeling less. It's about feeling wisely. And that wisdom starts the moment they stop numbing the ache and start decoding it. And maybe that's the greatest revelation of all. Pain doesn't close the eyes. It opens them. What once burned now illuminates. The empath steps out of the ashes, not with vengeance, but with vision. They see through masks, through manipulation, through their own fears. The same sensitivity that once broke them now becomes their superpower. And as that clarity grows, something stirs in the shadows, because the moment one awakens, the other must face the reflection. When the empath awakens, the balance shifts. The same energy that once dominated them begins to falter, because consciousness changes the entire field. The manipulator, the liar, the narcissist, they feel it before they can name it. Jung described this moment as the confrontation with the shadow. It's when illusion collides with awareness, and something inside the other person begins to crack. The mask no longer fits. The energy that once thrived on reaction now suffocates in silence. It's not punishment, it's exposure. The mirror has been lifted, and truth doesn't blink. You can see this dynamic everywhere, even in the spotlight of fame. Remember when Simone Biles stepped away from the Olympic stage? The world projected its own shadow onto her: weakness, disappointment, failure. But her awareness forced the public to see what they'd rather ignore: the cost of perfection. That's how psychological karma works. Consciousness redirects projection. And when Barack Obama maintained grace amid endless attacks, he too held up a mirror to the collective shadow of fear and division. Awareness, in both cases, became the quiet antidote to chaos. But there's a darker example too: Tiger Woods. His public unraveling wasn't just a scandal, it was shadow meeting spotlight. Everything hidden in the unconscious eventually demands expression. Jung would call it the autonomous complex, the part of the psyche that erupts when ignored too long. For the unhealed, exposure feels like destruction. For the aware, it feels like freedom. The difference lies in whether you face the mirror or flee from it. And that's what separates collapse from transformation. Cognitive dissonance, that clash between persona and truth, is brutal to watch. The toxic friend, the ex, the boss, or the public figure who built identity on control starts to crumble when reflection replaces reaction. The empath's silence becomes unbearable because it removes the emotional oxygen that kept the illusion alive. The manipulator's discomfort isn't cruelty, it's consequence. As Jung said, what you deny controls you, what you accept transforms you. Awareness burns, yes, but it burns clean. So the awakened empath learns something profound. They never needed revenge, only reflection. The light handles the rest. Their presence alone disrupts the unconscious patterns of those around them. And when the shadow begins to react, through anger, shame, or retreat, it only confirms that awareness is working. The mirror doesn't fight back. It just stands there, gleaming, while the illusions melt away. And in that quiet aftermath, something begins to form, the first hint of integration, the real source of power. There comes a moment in every empath's journey when revenge, reflection, and reaction all fade, leaving only stillness. That's when individuation begins. Carl Jung described it as the privilege of a lifetime, to become who you truly are. Integration is not an event, but a return, the gradual reunion of everything once fragmented. The empath learns that the goal was never to stop feeling, but to start feeling consciously. Awareness becomes the bridge between pain and peace, shadow and self. It's the quiet moment when understanding feels more powerful than any apology ever could. In analytical psychology, individuation is the process of reconciling the conscious and unconscious mind. Neuroscience now echoes what Jung intuited a century ago. When we integrate painful emotions instead of suppressing them, the brain literally rewires itself. Research from the University of California, Los Angeles, shows that naming emotions reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, while strengthening neural connections in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for regulation and insight. In other words, awareness transforms biology, consciousness changes chemistry. For empaths, this discovery is liberating. The same sensitivity that once felt like a burden becomes a sophisticated feedback system. A 2018 study published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience found that highly empathic individuals show increased activation in the insula, the brain's emotional radar, but also in regions linked to self-other distinction. That means empathy isn't about drowning in someone else's pain. It's about perceiving it without losing the boundary of self. True healing for empaths happens not when they close their hearts, but when they learn to navigate emotion with clarity. Integration, then, becomes a daily practice, not a theory. It looks like solitude that feels restorative instead of lonely. It's journaling as emotional calibration. It's learning to pause before absorbing energy that doesn't belong to you. Even silence becomes sacred because it allows the nervous system to settle and the unconscious to speak. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Integration is that making conscious, the reclaiming of authorship over one's inner narrative. And as this awareness deepens, something remarkable happens. Peace stops being conditional. The empath no longer depends on closure, recognition, or revenge to feel whole. The nervous system stabilizes. The energy field quiets. Awareness doesn't destroy, it transforms. What once felt like fragmentation now feels like freedom. This is the hidden science of awakening, neuroplasticity meeting individuation. The light no longer burns. It simply shines, steady and self-sustaining. And yet, even that light has one final truth to reveal. There's a sacred stillness that follows every storm. The air smells different, cleaner, almost holy, as if the sky itself just learned how to breathe again. That's what awakening feels like. For years, the empath carried tempests inside their chest, trying to protect everyone else from the rain. But awareness changes everything. It doesn't stop the thunder. It teaches you how to hear it without fear. The empath no longer flinches at lightning. They understand it as illumination. The storm isn't the enemy anymore. It's initiation. The light that once burned through them now glows within them. That's the difference between reaction and realization. You stop needing your pain to prove something. You stop needing your story to justify your sensitivity. Because when awareness arrives, identity expands, and suddenly you're not just the wounded one, not just the healer, not even just the empath. You're the whole spectrum, shadow and light, silence and song. You've become what Jung called a vessel of the self, consciousness embodied. The light no longer blinds, it guides. In this space, healing feels less like effort and more like remembering. The body softens, the breath deepens, and even the nervous system begins to trust again. Science calls it neuroplastic calm, the brain's ability to reshape itself after prolonged stress. Spiritually, it feels like forgiveness settling into the bones. You no longer crave the storm to prove your strength. You no longer seek karma to balance the scales. You realize that awareness itself is balance, the natural order restored. Everything returns to its rightful place, pain as teacher, peace as companion, love as constant. And then something beautiful happens. Synchronicities bloom like wildflowers after rain. The right people appear, the timing aligns. Life begins to mirror your new vibration. Jung described this as the psyche's dialogue with the universe, consciousness meeting destiny halfway. You start seeing signs not as coincidences, but as correspondence between your soul and the collective unconscious. Every gentle nudge, every repeated number, every sudden moment of clarity becomes a reminder. You are seen, guided, protected. The mirror that once showed pain now reflects purpose. That's the ultimate lesson. The revenge was never to hurt them. It was to wake up and never need to. Because the empath's awakening isn't a final scene. It's a beginning. A lighter chapter. A quieter kind of power. The light that used to scorch now nourishes. It doesn't need to burn to be bright. It just is. And if this message found you, if somewhere inside you felt the rain stop, write in the comments, I choose awareness over pain. Because maybe that's what awakening truly means. Realizing that even the storm was trying to teach you how to shine. Awareness isn't just an idea. It's a discipline. It's waking up every day and choosing not to repeat the story that broke you. It's realizing that boundaries are not walls. They are gates of peace. And the empath who once lived in reaction now walks in rhythm. Slower, calmer, more deliberate. You stop needing validation from chaos. You stop mistaking noise for connection. You begin to understand that not everyone deserves access to your energy. Only those who can meet your silence without trying to fill it. So here's the question that separates the old self from the awakened one. Will you keep waiting for the world to change? Or will you finally choose awareness over pain? Because healing isn't found in time. It's found in decision. Every empath reaches a point where they must stop asking why me and start asking what now. The truth is, the universe doesn't hand out closure. It gives you consciousness. What you do with it, that's your evolution. If you've ever felt invisible, misunderstood, or drained by people who mistook your kindness for weakness, this is your invitation to step into awareness. To start journaling instead of replaying old scenes. To protect your peace like it's sacred currency. To practice emotional boundaries not as defense, but as devotion. To see your empathy not as burden, but as blueprint. Because that's how the empath becomes their own healer, their own light, their own revolution. And as you move forward, remember this: awareness isn't the end of the story, it's the threshold. Once you see, you can't unsee. Once you awaken, you can't return to illusion. You'll feel lighter, quieter, stronger. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You'll stop chasing justice and start being it. You'll stop waiting for karma and start living as consciousness itself. So tell me, what part of your old self are you ready to leave behind tonight? If this message spoke to something buried deep inside you, write in the comments, "I choose awareness over pain." And if you're ready to keep awakening, subscribe and stay with us here on Hidden Mind. Because this isn't just a channel, it's a journey back to the part of you that was never broken.